and I hope everyone can hear me. I am load shed, and also I believe that most of Johannesburg, especially the northern suburbs, will be without water. So this is the new normal on top of the pandemic that we find ourselves in as a country. And, you are an organization that represents small businesses, which relies on efficient electricity supply and also water supply. So these are the challenges, again, that the country is faced with. And without, if we continue to have these challenges, we will struggle to recover from this pandemic. So I'll start off with where we were before the pandemic. South Africa had 3 quarters of negative growth. And so we were in a recession. And I believe that the pandemic pushed us further down, but we were going down anyway. The trend was looking negative. We struggled to implement reforms that are required to turn the economy around. And as a result, we started seeing negative economic growth. And so when the pandemic hit us, I often say that it is the pandemic helped mask the problems of South Africa. So we now look like other countries who are experiencing an economic downfall because of the pandemic. But as Warren Buffett said, it is only when the tide comes out do you know who's been swimming naked. And I fear that will happen with us, that as other economies turn the corner, we are going to struggle and we'll still be quite weak. We had the budget recently, and looking at the budget, the Treasury's projections of GDP, they are very low, especially in 2022, 2023, which also tells me that this country will struggle even more than expected to come out of the downfall that has been a result of the pandemic. What we're seeing in terms of the composition of the economy, the South Africa's economy, unlike many other countries that rely on one sector or one resource, we are very dynamic and diverse economy. So, finance is about 20% of our GDP, trade is about 21%, manufacturing is 13% of our GDP. We also have a growing mining is 9% of our GDP. So we don't rely on one commodity or one sector. But the problem over the past is that there's one sector that has been growing the fastest, and that's finance, which doesn't absorb labor as much as manufacturing, agriculture, tourism, and mining does. Those are the sectors that actually should be driving growth, not the finance sector. The finance sector is the one that doesn't employ as many people, so it's not labor intensive. We don't get a lot of revenues from finance, and it's also not tradable, so it's not something we export and import in the same way as we would do with manufactured products. So as John mentioned earlier, that the African Continental Free Trade Area is important for many of our businesses, especially small and medium-sized entities that will and should thrive through this market, this African market, which is predominantly young, and that our product would be absorbed quicker than, let's say, if we had to compete with countries like Asia or even Latin America. So there is potential to grow. We just need the government to open markets for many of our small and medium-sized entities. We also need to ensure that the regulatory framework that governs the Africa Continental Free Trade Area is put in place so that we get this trade going. Currently, we have only 16% on intra-Africa trade, and we need to grow that to at least 30% in the next 5-10 years. So that is a benefit for some of our small and medium-sized entities. But closer to home, and what has happened in the short term is that last year the president announced the 500 billion fiscal support, and that was looked at as one way of putting a buffer to economic growth and helping small and medium-sized entities. And also the Department of Small Businesses also allocated a few funds to help some of our entities. But a problem with the fiscal support is that the 200 billion that was supposed to go to the credit guarantee scheme that was supposed to be extended to small businesses, medium-sized businesses, and some informal businesses, only about 18 billion has been extended. So 18 billion of the 200 billion has been put into the system, into the economy, supporting businesses. That is not sufficient. So I was very surprised by the silence of businesses from, when the budget 2021 was announced, and there was no mention of this 200 billion that was supposed to support businesses. And I really think at this point, a grant or even signing checks to businesses to help them revive, to help them, become sustainable and also recover, some of them, is needed. And I think that you cannot grow an economy without these businesses. Part of the 350 Rand COVID grant that has been given by government to individuals, that is because businesses shed labor, and therefore government felt that they needed to support those that don't qualify for SASSA grants, but have lost their jobs, so they require some form of assistance. But had we supported businesses, had we supported the informal sector, had we supported small and medium-sized entities especially, they wouldn't have had the need to shed jobs, and we wouldn't have had the need to give that 350 Rand COVID grant. So I think that it is important to support businesses, and also ensure that businesses don't shed jobs as a result, because government has stepped in and supported businesses. So I think that there's a lot that we can play, or businesses can play, in terms of ensuring that government supports businesses. And as we know, we need employment, and we need businesses to help revive the economy. So we had the unemployment numbers come out, and the unemployment number, if you include discouraged workers, is around 32, let's just say 33%. So you can't grow an economy when 43% of your working population is unemployed. It's really unsustainable, and something needs to be done to chip away at this very high unemployment number. During the financial crisis of 2018 and 2019, we lost 1 million jobs, and we only managed to recover all those lost jobs in 5 years. So again, if we in the second quarter, the numbers showed that we lost 2.2 million jobs last year, and so it will take us a very long time to regain those jobs. And I think what is the difference between the financial crisis and now is that 2 years after the financial crisis, we had the World Cup. So we had to also look at this. We had a huge infrastructure drive. We had a huge employment drive, especially in the construction sector. And now there is none of that impetus to really, expedite some of the urgent infrastructure that needs to be done urgently. The president announced the reconstruction policy, and he did it, I think it was last year, when he talked about prioritizing infrastructure. And it is important because infrastructure is one way of helping a country attain sustainable growth. And so what he did was appoint Dr. Ramokgopa to head up the Investment in Infrastructure Office in the presidency. And so Dr. Ramokgopa is looking at bankable projects and working with the financial sector, asset managers, pension funds, to look at ways in which we can have a private-public partnership model of funding infrastructure investment. So far, we've always had very good PPPs when it comes to road infrastructure, especially the N3 is one notable one. But then what has been interesting this time around is many of the asset managers are willing to actually pay for social infrastructure such as hospitals and schools. And so a lot of the new investment in infrastructure will come out of this initiative between a partnership between private and public sector. The problem here, and this is where it's really government. Government needs to roll out, needs to have a rollout plan, because the private sector cannot operate or cannot invest, needs to understand that there's infrastructure plan in the pipeline. So we need a pipeline. It needs to be transparent. It needs to be not just a 2-year horizon, but maybe a 10 to 20-year horizon of infrastructure plans, so that all companies that are interested in participating can prepare themselves for various infrastructure, be it water, sanitation, road, etc. Bridge building. This will also enable international investors and companies to line up and also bid in this infrastructure drive. Infrastructure also is a transfer of knowledge, so that's why it's also important. And also, so skills transfer, knowledge transfer, it's a great employer, and it helps with sustainable growth in the long term. And that's why I think that this initiative is really important, and one that could work if government puts this pipeline of projects so that businesses can bid appropriately. So that's one way of one positive. The other low-hanging fruit, and we've had several low-hanging fruit, and as we all know, if we leave a low-hanging fruit, it will drop and rot, and then we'd have to now climb the tree to pick the right fruit. And I think we've watched many fruit drop, and we struggle to climb. Spectrum needs to be released immediately. We've been talking about the release of spectrum for many, many years. Spectrum in 2013, we had a policy called SA Connect, and SA Connect was supposed to provide broadband to 90% of the country and link government, health, so hospitals, and also public schools. And the target for SA Connect was that by 2020, 90% of the country would have broadband. We've now found ourselves, we found ourselves last year, 2020, in a midst of a pandemic, and most of the rural and also public schools outside the urban areas did not have access to the internet, and therefore many children could not go to school. And this is an example of a policy that had foresight, and not because of the pandemic. It was just a policy that South Africa then felt that it needed. And now we find ourselves without even half of that that policy implemented. In the State of the Nation address, the president made mention of SA Connect. But what was interesting is that he mentioned it as if it's a new policy. He said, it's almost like he wants to relaunch it, which was quite startling, because it is a policy that, there's policy documents, you can Google it, there's a whole document on it, and the problem was implementation. So again, government policy problem has always been lack of implementation, and that's what that's really the difference between a winning economy and one that will just struggle along. So we don't have time right now as a country to kick the can down the road and have ideological debates that tear us apart. I think that the pandemic has really highlighted many of our weaknesses. I started off making comments about the water supply in Gauteng. We've had the heaviest rains, good rains in January and February. Our dams were full. We find ourselves with water maintenance issues that are preventing us from actually getting water in the next 2 days. So these again are issues that linger and that will prevent South Africa from being an output-driven and productive country when we have such problems giving us speed bumps along the way. So I think, in the main, and just in conclusion, because I want to leave some room for Q&A, we do have, this is a very challenging period. I had hoped that we would iron out certain things very quickly in this period, but I think that we haven't done so as quickly as I thought. We still are, we still are politically tied up, and we still have ideological issues. We are not turning the corner as quickly as I'd expected. We're not implementing reforms as quickly as I expected. And we need to do so in order for us to grow this economy and to chip away at the very high unemployment rate. And so the challenges are there, but we need to be the voice that ensures that we're heard, and we need to help the government actually grow this economy. Thanks, Wilna.
Thabi, thank you very much. Are there any questions for Thabi? Thabi, with the theme on the COVID, I would like to ask you something. And do you have any information on the COVID rollout? Because currently we get 40,000 vaccines per week. That will take us to get herd immunity 19 years. So actually we can't say South Africa has started with vaccinations because I don't think this will count. Do you have any information?
So I don't have any information, but what has surprised me is that we've been using the J&J trial vaccines. So that's why we've been getting this 80,000 supply. And we still, I know that the government announced that we will be getting Pfizer, so we will be getting a couple of million Pfizer vaccines. But again, I believe that it is emergency usage. What is very interesting is that we are vaccinating frontline workers using trials, J&J and Pfizer. And I've always thought, in a war, you put your strongest men in front and your strongest men and women at the back. And so with us, what we're doing is actually using trial vaccines to vaccinate all our healthcare workers. And should anything go wrong, or should it not really work with especially the J&J, not the J&J, the Pfizer one not work as expected because of the strain, what happens if we're still exposing our frontline workers? But I think that we are stuck because we need the producers of the vaccine to modify their vaccines and factor in the new strain in their testing and stuff. So that's where we are stuck and what's delaying our inoculation. But at the same time, we are not prepared. I don't feel like if we're prepared enough. If we had 50 million delivered tomorrow, what are we? I don't know what happens. I don't know which station am I going to be vaccinated at. I don't know whether is it work that will vaccinate, or do I have to go to a hospital? And I'd hoped that the groundwork would be done now as we're preparing for receiving this vaccine. So I don't know whether I'm not comforted by what the silence, to be honest. And I think that also business needs to be involved in the distribution of these vaccines.
Thabi, thank you very much, Haiti. And I see you have a question. If you can just unmute yourself.
Thank you, Wenda. Good morning, Thabi. It's always a pleasure to listen to you because you bring so much crucial information that's profound for the way forward. What I would like to know from you, and I've asked you previously the question in the beginning of lockdown, how do you see in tourism the comeback, and how will it happen? If I could have your opinion about that.
Yes. So the tourism sector, I think it falls into that 200 billion that I said we needed to actually put into the system. I think that the tourism sector is a very important sector. We get significant revenues from it, and directly and indirectly. The tourism sector enables a lot of other sectors and supports a lot of other sectors. Tourists come from all over the world, and local tourists, and they also consume products from South Africa. So I think that we needed to support, even if we're in lockdown 3, I think that they should also get the funding to support them, that whenever we are back to lockdown 1, these companies can still, or the sector can still operate. But without giving tourism sector the financial support, we're really killing a very important sector in the economy. Tourism also relies on heavily, as I mentioned, on international travel. And right now, not many people are coming to South Africa to enjoy this country because of the strain that was discovered in South Africa. I think it's quite a big deterrent. And so we need to ensure that they post, as we are vaccinated, we do also have a big tourism drive. I know that proudly SA is doing a big localization drive, and I was part of the discussions there last week. And my argument there with localization is that you can't argue for localization if you're not supporting local businesses. I need to purchase local products knowing that that they are given the correct financial support for them to survive. I need to support South African products because the quality of South African products compete with other countries. But that cannot happen if our own business people and our citizens who want to go into entrepreneurship are not supported even financially by our banks and also development funding institutions. We also need to look at entrepreneurship very differently. We don't support, I often argue that there's currently one pipeline from matric to finding a job, and that's through university in South Africa. We don't have a lot of, the technical system has been done away with. We don't support entrepreneurship and people going into entrepreneurship that will support many sectors, including especially the tourism sector. So that's also one way of ensuring that post-COVID, we support young people who want to go into entrepreneurship so that when we do finally open up and we have tourists coming to the country, these are the entrepreneurs that are supported by this huge localization drive and also tourism drive. So again, it's not an easy one to answer because the tourism sector is directly impacted by COVID because we cannot travel and we need to social distance, but we need to put in place policies and we need to ensure that we prepare ourselves for when a recovery happens, that this sector is not one that dies out.
I don't see any more questions. Thabi, thank you very much. I would like to thank you for your time today. It was truly enlightening information you gave us, and especially the impact on the SMME segment. You're a well-respected economist, and you did give a true account of our current economic situation. It sounded scary a bit for us, but thank you for that. We also appreciate your time spent as a non-executive director of the SBI, and especially you caring for the small business segment of your economy. Thabi, thank you very much.
It's a pleasure.
Our next speaker, Mr. George, runs a bit late. So I think what I'm going to do, Leandro, if you give me the screen,